Hi, welcome to episode 63 of the American Tributaries podcast, where to break out of the bubbles we've all been living in, we're using modern technology to explore the various currents of people in our great country, kind of like a 21st century Lewis and Clark journey. I'm your host, Michael Whidden, here in Brooklyn, New York, and thank you for joining me in this exploration of America. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Mike Myers. Mike lives about 700 miles to the west of me on the outskirts of Indianapolis, where he is a high school social studies teacher. And we were connected by a mutual friend, Dustin McKinney. Dustin was a guest on episode 51. Mike, thanks so much for joining me today. How are you doing? And could you share a bit of your story?
Yeah, I'm doing well. My name is Mike. Thanks for having me. I've spent my whole life in West Central Indiana, for better or worse. No, it's been pretty good. And spent my high school career there, elementary. Went to college at Wabash College, which is a small liberal arts college in Crawfordsville, Indiana, which, as you said, it's about an hour west of Indianapolis. So it's like equidistant between Indianapolis and the Illinois state line. And that's where I went to college. That's where I also grew up. And it's an all-male college. So I went to an all-male college and then got a job about 10 miles north of there. And I've been teaching social studies. I spent 5 years as an assistant principal at a middle school in the same district. And then I spent 11 years at a middle school, that same middle school, 6 as a teacher, 5 as an administrator. And then the last year, I got back into the classroom and I'm enjoying life a lot more. And so I'm teaching, currently I'm teaching AP US History, World History, and AP Human Geography at North Montgomery High School in just north of Crawfordsville.
Oh, wow. Now, I have a friend who teaches AP, like U.S. history in New Jersey.
Sure.
Is it the same curriculum no matter where you are? That is?
Yeah, same curriculum, which is kind of weird because each state has different standards for everything, which as we're finding out between Florida, Texas, Indiana, New Jersey, New York, we're seeing all these complications with their state, kind of with their state standards and what can be kind of produced. But as far as AP goes, it is lockstep. So it's across the country, same exact curriculum.
Okay. And what drew you into teaching?
So my mom was like a special education teacher when I was first growing up. And she ended up leaving the profession after I was born and doing something else. But my dad is actually, next year is going to be his last year. It'll be his 41st. He spent 41 years in elementary physical education. So
wow.
41 years wrangling little kids. But no, I kind of grew up around it. All of his friends were teachers. All the people we knew were teachers. And when you grow up in a smaller town, you kind of do with what you know. And I knew a lot of teachers, and I really grew a lot of interest in it. My dad loved it. All of his friends loved it. And so that's what we kind of went with. And I enjoyed, I wasn't sure if I'd like it or not. And my mom kept telling me, it was like, I think you're just choosing this because this is the only thing you've ever seen before. And I was like, well, maybe. And so, and she goes, also, you're going to go to a nice, expensive liberal arts college. You're going to go into public education. She's like, awesome, great. I'm like, but I ended up going, and I'd done some cadet teaching in high school with like little kids, like mostly 4th and 6th graders, and I enjoyed it. And but when I was in college, I started coaching, and then I started doing some like student teaching as well. And I found out that I lucked into also loving the thing that I was most surrounded by. And like there's all kinds of outlets to get your personality out there, but I thought the classroom was perfect for me. Kids didn't bug me. I enjoyed it when they gave me some crap. I enjoyed giving them some. As I've said before, people always ask, why do you teach? I go, well, for the attention. I got 30 eyes on me, or not 30 eyes. I had 60 eyes on me. And it's all the time. So it feels good. And and I love it. And then why I chose history was just, can really, we can get into it in this, but the reason I chose history is because A, it's enjoyable. B, kids usually find an interest in it because if you can connect it back to them, it's so easy to connect back. Math's hard to connect back to your daily life. English you can, but when you go into grammar, people are like, I don't care about this. And then, but history I always thought was such an easy connection to people's lives that I was like, man, I could really make this worthwhile for kids, and especially U.S. history, just knowing the things that we've done, haven't done, things that may get brushed under, things that you don't know everything about. And so it's been a fun time. But that's why, long-winded answer,
Mhm.
as
Yeah.
the educator myself, uh, that's why I got into teaching, and I absolutely love
Yeah. The what I find interesting about with history though is I find because I was a history major in college as well, U.S. history, and it's amazing how many people forget history, or even like people who should be smart enough to know it. Like for me, and this is it's almost like maybe it isn't even less history, but maybe more human nature. But like one of the things that I find funny as I get older, I'm like 52 now, is how many people will kind of sound exactly like their parents and talk about how bad the music is, or complain about this or that, and forget like how the histories, or people who might think like I know that these have been rough times for the country, but there have been other rough times. Like I know that there's the 1968 was one of the most torturous
it.
year for the countries. We had the Great Depression. Like we have faced major obstacles and transformations. And to me, one of the things that gives me comfort about the I guess the stresses we're seeing now is I think that there's an idea I call like maybe almost like applied history, but kind of trying to really be mindful of applying the history of the past to the experiences of now. And to me, what I'd say is like the internet is a revolutionary thing, and that's great marketing, but there's also consequences to having a revolution in human existence. The printing press led to a lot of disruption, and disruption is a little chaotic. Disruption
Yeah.
is a little uncomfortable. Disruption means there's going to be change. And I would say, like, in the long run, anything that allows human beings to communicate more effortlessly in the long run is going to be good, but it's never going to be perfect. Like having newspapers that cover things and expose things that are bad, that's not a bad thing, because without that you wouldn't have it at all. But there's also a lot of lies that are out there. I mean, there was lies with like newspapers, there was anonymous articles. I mean, even like the
Mhm.
Federalist Papers was written anonymously, right? So one of our bedrock foundations of getting a constitution passed was written by people who didn't want their names known. So we have to kind of be more, I don't want to say forgiving, but I think more putting the current disruptions in the historical context that says like where this is our challenge, and our forefathers and foremothers were up to it, and we'll be up for it too, but we have to be mindful of that and patient with that, and try to continue to bend that arc of progress in history in a positive direction.
Yeah, and
That's
I
my little
think,
soapbox.
yeah, no, you're good, and I agree with that. I think the two things that come from that is, I think one of the things that we realize is that we're worried about. This is like, oh, it's so chaotic. Oh, it's so chaotic. Oh, it's so chaotic. But I think we also have access to so much information that it can be chaotic because there is currently crises around the world all the time. And there was in 1600, and there was in 1900, and there is now. And now we're so much more able to lock ourselves in on those crises that we find that those crises then, I think, infringe upon our daily lives that wouldn't have infringed on anyone's life. I mean, you think you're living in Stillwater, Oklahoma in 1955, you have no idea what's going on outside of the United States unless it's in your paper. You know what I
Right.
mean? Or you're listening
Right.
to it on the news, you might see some Walter Cronkite talk about it. Other than that, you're not going to hear it. And so I think sometimes we have this catastrophizing, right,
Yeah.
effect where it's like you're on Twitter and you're scrolling and scrolling. I'm not even going to get into Twitter,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you're scrolling through Twitter and it's like, oh my gosh, everything's falling apart. It's been falling apart for you know 3,000 years. It's just, we just haven't always been able to notice it. But on the flip side of that, and why I see the internet, and when you brought this up about the printing press, when you brought it up about like even television, and then now the internet, is that what also is kind of something that it's shaky, which kind of 1968, you can kind of talk about that as well. But every time when the printing press was created, it was not created for the rich, right? It was created because it could allow those not in higher positions to gain information. And that ticked a lot of people off, the rich people, right? And
Yeah, the
so,
aristocrats, the priests were
right,
like, you know,
like, whoa, 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 you guys can't read this. Only I can read Latin. It's like, well,
right.
now it's in my language, pal. I can
Yeah.
read it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and so, and then you go along to television. Now that's bringing information that maybe lower income areas weren't able to, if you could afford a
And it
TV.
was showing you that
Exactly, it's
information
showing you
too.
like,
You
yeah,
visceral.
especially like Vietnam, right? And
Yeah.
so now you're getting it on your front screen, which formerly the government could kind of control. Now the government's losing control; those in power are losing that control. And then the internet comes around, and now you've got anybody walking around with one of these who can access information. I mean, like that,
Yeah.
And so that gives a lot of power to those that had never really had power before. And those that have been in power for a really long time in the United States, that's mostly those with money and maybe of a certain race, And so when that power gets shaken, there's that rumbling, right? 1968, there's that rumbling. And
Yeah.
it's kind of like people challenging the status quo, people challenging because they have information in front of them and they
Yeah.
can gain information just as much as you can. And when that happens, you're gonna have what's going on right now. Like the last 10 years, in my opinion, has been, just people of the lower mark, not even lower, but like socioeconomic level. But I'm talking like middle class and lower class who have just kind of started figuring out to start questioning, to start
Yeah.
asking whether they're going down the right avenues. That's the hard part because
Right.
once all that technology is out there, once all that information is out there, now the hard part is figuring out what's true and not, which, as we find out, some social media platforms and others have done a pretty good job of hiding what's real and what's not. But the information is there. And I think that's why we also see some of that rockiness right now, right? Is that people are gaining information that they didn't have before. And when people that didn't normally get information, they're going to question. And when people
Yeah.
question, people get upset, And so I kind of see that as well. But that's why I like teaching history, is because I'm going to try to show them the real thing and to question things and how to look at things and know if they're real or not. But also, like, one of the things you said is like, we've been having these problems for years, like there's been all kinds of things in history that could kind of find ourselves here. And, kind of the old ideas that like, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, and so, and I think that's really true. I use that one a lot, and the kids kind of like it because that's how I connect it, but it does rhyme, and there's things that pop up all the time, and I'm just trying to, you try to show them, when you see these things will happen, and it's like when I'm covering wars, who fights in the wars? It's not the people making the wars,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah. Yeah.
and then and so that's like one example of a common theme from 500 years ago to now. It's like they could see that, to where if I ask the question about World War One, I go, "Oh man, who do you think's fighting in World War One?" They're like, "No, the people who don't have any money." I'm like, "You're right, guys."
Right.
So that's
Right.
like, and who isn't going to have to fight in this war? The people that have money. I'm like, you guys are rolling your eyes, but you guys are figuring out how life works, man.
Yeah.
So no, that is why it's enjoyable. But I think that's a good point of what you're saying. It's like, got to have a little perspective here that's been going on, and so rocky times are rocky times, and having people of your generation and my generation realize that this new generation isn't going to turn everything upside down and make it terrible. So
Yeah. Well, the other thing though is I think in that respect is I have to roll my eyes at peers or people that are a little older who are like, oh, the next generation is all screwed up or whatever. When I'm like, what, to the extent there is a mess in our country, it's like it's on our hands. Like it's like I was, I came out of college in 1993, and if you're within 5-10 years of me, like all of this is happened on our watch. Like there's nobody else to blame. So to the extent you're getting frustrated with the younger generation, that they came up in our environment.
I love when I don't love it. I don't like the idea, but when people are like, it's like, oh, this whole generation just wants participation trophies. Everybody gets a trophy. I'm like, they were the kids in that situation. Like, who were the people giving them the trophies? It's
Right.
like, you guys, like, you were the
Right.
ones who made it. Like, you were the ones who wanted your kid to have a trophy. And now you're complaining because you think people are entitled. Like, A, I don't think that creates entitlement. But it's
Right.
like, you're talking about yourself. Like, what are you, absent? Like, that's what I'm
Right.
saying, but yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
But and the other thing is, I think like there's also, I think that one of the things that I think the part of the media, and I don't care whether it's left or right or whatever, is that there. I mean, there are places that maybe give more facts than others, but I think that all of them have a certain incentivization to kind of more sensationalize, or still to give certain give news from a certain direction. And like to
Yeah.
me, like in New York, I mean, New York is a very like blue bubble, but like the New York Times is not going to upset all of its blue readers by writing anything positive about what Donald Trump ever did. Like they could not do that, because they're going to get people who are going to get upset. I mean, I would like that to not be the case, but in their minds, you're never going to hear anything positive. And on the other side, you're never going to hear Fox News say something positive about what Joe Biden did. Or at least I can't imagine it, right?
Mm.
And I think that what I've been trying to be, I think, more mindful of is like looking, when you look at the context of history, there's always like, there's good and bad in all of it. And we just need to be more, I think, open minded about all of those things. Like the things, there were problems, we're getting better with them. And there's always going to be like new problems. So in some respects, like it's like kind of like, I don't know, just realizing that to the extent we're going to change things, it's going to take time. And it's easy maybe as a white heterosexual man to say like, oh, just be patient,
Yeah.
but like think that, but it does like to me, the grounding reference for me is like, think about like what it's like in work, think about in your school. To the extent you want to make changes even in your school for like simple things, it takes time. In corporate America, to get anything done, it takes time. Now imagine trying to rally an entire society of 330 million people living in so many different contexts, so many different challenges, to get them all to like buy into something. That's impossible.
Yeah.
But to the extent we're going to bring about change, it's going to take time. It doesn't mean give up, but anything I've read about entrepreneurs trying to change the world, it takes persistence and adaptation. They don't say be single-minded and inflexible. That's
Yeah.
not what they say to do.
No, no, but I will say on the flip side of that, I think there has been moments in especially American history where you need someone to make the country go cold turkey. You know what I mean? Instead of
Mm.
using a nicotine patch, right? Like it's
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm just going to slowly quit smoking. It's like, no, this needs to be done, and it needs
Yeah.
to be now. And
Yeah.
so when we saw the change, like I think about like this. I mean, even if you talk about like the end of slavery in the United States, right? Like abolitionists have been around since the 1700s. You know, parts of Pennsylvania, especially, and uh, and I mean, no traction. You know what I mean? Like you've
Yeah.
got William Lloyd Garrison, no traction. You got these other things like no real traction, and so it takes kind of some larger things to happen for anything to make change, and that's not fun. But at the same time, I think that needs to happen because, like the civil rights era, when we see these marches, when we see everything else, which can be seen as, like an event, someone who's being single-minded, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
single-minded. I'm not going to flex on this. I'm not going to move from this. And I know that these were peaceful protests for the most part, but there were also moments where they weren't particularly peaceful, and you had people speaking out. A lot of people thought, gosh, these people are speaking out of their minds. They're being a little too out there. They're too progressive on these, but sometimes that also shakes the foundation a little bit, and things happen. And so I think it's a little bit of a mix there of
Yeah.
probably some people that need to be really patient and to know this is going to take longer than probably what we think. But in there, you're going to need to sprinkle in some people that are like, no, I'm not budging. Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Yeah.
am, you know what I mean? And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's not me disagreeing with it. That's just like, there also needs to be those people. I'm not one of those people. I'm like you. I'm a white heterosexual male from the middle of the Midwest who not a whole lot is going to impact my life. I can play the long game because my long game is I'm doing okay, and,
Right.
and so my patience can be there. And so knowing that's going to take a while, but then you're going to need some other people in the country to really step up and to kind of go for it.
Oh yeah.
That's what I
Well,
think about the younger generation.
but I think like to me that is where like what I'd say that you can take the history of the past and apply it to the present. Like
Yeah.
for me, at least I think from a New York state of mind, from a New York upbringing, like if you look at like when there's riots, whether it's like in L.A. or Newark or whatever, um, or to the extent that there were protests, with George Floyd that got like cut out of control, you owe it to me. I would always look at those with the point of like, but the reason why this is happening is because people are upset. They're communicating something.
Yeah.
Those are that's the inflexibility that we need to have to hear that message. But I think that the way I look at it is like the action is also communication, right? And so to me, like I found January 6th was the most it was the most disturbing day of my life, because it just felt like everything, the foundations were shaking. I was here for 9/11. My wife was like, running from the smoke from the World Trade Center collapse. I was running up and down Manhattan, Broadway, looking for her. But January 6th was more disturbing because it felt so like the foundation's shaking. But what I'd say, like, as I've had some distance, is that I think that we need to, one, whatever people did that was against the law should be held accountable. But we also need to be asking ourselves, how is it that we have put people in a state of mind, enough people in a state of mind, that they would think that all those actions were like their best course of action? Like, how have we created a society where people, just like if you're rioting and you're destroying the property in your own neighborhood and getting violent, why are they feeling that way? And to me, I'd be like, why do people feel so disenchanted, so upset, so angry, so alienated with our society, that disrupting the democratic process is not something that they're worried about? And I think in that respect, like, I think that there has to be, we have to hold ourselves accountable for saying, like, what is making people so hopeless in that respect, to feel like we have to resort to this kind of violence to impact society.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough one because those are such different. Because I think about the George Floyd protests versus like January 6th. I guess.
And I'm
No,
not talking
no, I
about
know you're
George
not.
Floyd,
I
like
know you're not.
the
I was like,
protests, where I'm talking
yeah,
about like just any time
communication.
people
Okay,
become
gotcha.
violent in
Yeah,
expressing their
yeah,
disappointment and frustration with society.
yeah, yeah. That's a difficult piece, but once again, it's pretty American,
Yeah.
and so which tells you, in my opinion, are we the greatest democratic process of all time? No, and so that's when people feel like they're kind of out of the loop or disenfranchised, whether albeit correct or not. I have a hard time with people on January 6th feeling disenfranchised when their their race has been able to vote for the last 300 years, or almost 300 years, and they didn't have to fight for civil rights. Women did, but and so I have a little bit of a problem with that one. Um, but I get that when people feel disenfranchised and not listened to, that's how they take action. And I guess for me, I don't know. It's difficult because I feel like if we're talking like politically disenfranchised, what is the basis behind that? Like,
Mm.
is there actual truth behind that? Because you had some people who still believe that their vote didn't count and it went into, a machine and it switched the vote, whatever. And then, you've also got people who legitimately find it very hard to vote. They're having to wait 4 hours in line, and they're having to wait this and that, to where how much does that play an impact? I don't know. Get into voting laws, but
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but I don't know. I think being able to listen to those moments. I'm trying to think about that. I think trying to listen to those moments. I don't know. I'm thinking about that. Yeah.
Well, I did note a question, and we'll have to talk about Indiana. But like,
Sure.
as I was thinking about the history here, one of the things that it got me wondering about is, like, does the does this technology that gives us all the power of the printing press, and frankly the power even of like the of Walter Cronkite, right? I mean, we've got both in our hand, right? Every one of us has that potential influence.
Yeah.
Does that change how you have to, like, I guess, conduct a democracy? And what I'm thinking is more like, so like, one of the things I've seen, like, say with like schools, you're a teacher, and I don't know that it could be your case, but like, guess, and I'll simplify it, but one of the things that I've noticed is like, the schools can say, here's all of our emails, be in touch, right? There are a lot of parents who are never going to bother the principal or the school or the teachers
Mhm.
because they're busy and their kids like kind of like doing fine enough. The people who are going to speak out are the ones who are the most upset, either legitimately or they perceive themselves to be legitimate, right? And that doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference. So like you can give more connectivity to like the school administration, but you might end up having to cater a lot more to just the loudest voices. And that could be very disruptive towards a school or a democracy. I'm not saying that you have actually had that experience. I'm not saying that
Oh
I've
yeah,
seen
I
it,
have. Yeah,
but
I definitely
so
have.
like does a democracy have to figure out, and now that we've given like seamless connectivity to everybody, and there are a lot of people who are actually just working hard and got their heads down, and there are the only people who either are aggrieved or feel aggrieved or are emotional or feel emotional are the ones who are like the most like vocal.
Mhm.
How do you manage those people while also managing to kind of keep the society functioning for all those other people who are kind of like just hunkered down, just doing their everyday stuff?
Yeah. And that's a case, and that's hard because that's a case by case thing, right? To where if we relinquish all of our like ideals to the few, that can be problematic for, like you're saying, the people that are putting their heads down and work hard. But, and I'm not saying the people that are vocal don't work hard or don't put their heads down. They can do
No.
both. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so, um, I would always say this is how I phrased it when I was like an assistant principal and still today.
Mhm.
Is this person looking out in the best interests of students? Is this person looking out for the best interests of their own kid and not have some kind of, ulterior motive or anything else like that? And I think the hard part is still today, right? Like in the United States, the people that are listened to, right, that have larger voices still come from some kind of like, you know, uh, upper society echelon, in my opinion, because
Mhm.
you can be on Facebook and complain all you want to. No one's listening to you. And this is like, I guess, speaking in like Indiana, like even here where like school board stuff can happen and all that's like, they still don't listen to the crazy people, and which is good. But if you have some power and you have a little bit of swing, um, and you can get your voice heard, I think it's going to be really important for government, different officials, whether that be school districts, whether that be governors, whether that be anybody, mayors, I think we just have to figure out, are these loud voices working in the best interests of democracy, of the citizenry, because if they're not, then most of the citizens are probably not going to agree with them. And that's what I've kind of found out over time, is that you've got these loud voices. Like I would have someone complain about the school or whatever that is to me, or a decision I made. And I was like, all right, taking this with a grain of salt because I know this person. Okay. But when I look at it, do I get that feeling in my stomach that they're trying to do the right thing? If I don't, then I'm not going to negotiate with that.
Mhm.
I'm not going to negotiate with an email terrorist.
Mhm.
I'm gonna let that kind of play out. But if there are times where I get an email from that same person who is loud, but this time I'm like, there might be some validity here, and so that's the only time I would kind of make changes. And I think that's just what's going to have to be. Leadership is tough in this day and age. Back maybe even 70 years ago, you can make decisions and you're not going to get a whole lot of input, from outside forces. Like you're going to be able to, I mean, you think about like all the New Deal stuff FDR did. Like, could you imagine people like trying to like step in? Like he just went like, nope. Well, he didn't even do it. Congress was like, nope, we're doing it,
Yeah.
and kind of going, and all the voices just kind of fell by the wayside. Whether it was right or wrong, I mean, ultimately a lot of those things worked, um, but now you can hear voices, from everywhere, and so I think um, people in government are going to have to get really good at knowing that you're going to make some loud people upset,
Mhm.
especially if they're not working for the benefit of the country, the citizens, or whatever. And I think that's a hard thing to do because that means that we also need people in government and leadership positions that can't be influenced by that, that also have the citizens and the democracy, at the forefront. And I'm not sure if there's a whole lot of people looking to get into government that have that,
Yeah.
and that's tough.
Yeah.
That's a fear of mine. It's like, who's getting into this nowadays?
Right. Who's inspired to do it?
Who's inspired to do it? Because I'm not. I'm not saying I'm qualified, but also like you think you're going to do the right thing, but who knows? You get in there and the money starts flying and people start jabbing at you, and that's a tough gig. And so we've got to have some headstrong people in there to kind of turn the tide. And as you said, it's a patience game. It's going to take a long time.
Well, the other thing though is when we're talking about this is that I think that one of the things that I've been trying to do is also to try to move, I guess, reorient ourselves about like where the power is, because the power isn't necessarily just with the politicians.
Sure.
We all as citizens have some influence too on things. So I think that one of the other things that I try to be mindful of is not necessarily echoing everything that I see that like outrages me or upsets me. Because I think that what you saw, I'd say between like the 2016 and 2020 elections, especially for me, was everything that seemed outrageous that I saw on Facebook, I would immediately like repost and like, can you believe this? And like, and then, and I think what I've decided now is like, I want to contribute more positivity to things, and I don't want to just be kind of giving into that outrage machine that's out there and knows with all the analytics and all the data it has that what's going to trigger us. I don't want to contribute that anymore. So I think there's also that idea of like, there are people, those loud voices who may or may not be upset. Every one of us should be thinking before we kind of add our voice to their voice.
Sure.
Like not just the administrators in the school or the politicians, but each of us needs to be saying, what's this person's story? And if I don't know enough about it, I'm not going to give them my followers. I'm not going to repost.
It's a hard pull. That's a hard pull because it's easy. It's easy to kind of be a keyboard warrior. So that's difficult to do. But that is something that I think educators have been really pushing the last couple of years, because I'm someone who you hear it in the classroom. You're like in a third grade classroom. Someone mouths off, the other one's like, "No, my dad's better." I'm like, "Whoa, hold on, who cares?" And so it's human nature to kind of want to pop off. But I kind of went through the same thing, and others, if people didn't just leave social media like a lot of my friends did, and for those of us that kind of stick around, it's kind of like, all right, like I don't know this person, so why should I even comment? It's not going to make any difference. And if I don't give them that attention, maybe that's the key, I guess.
And also people are just venting. I think some of it, people are just venting, or, the other thing is like you're eavesdropping. Like sometimes you might have a friend and you see a discussion or somebody post something, but I think that there also requires that mental flexibility to understand that, like, sometimes somebody posts something and it might be totally out of line for you, but it's really almost intended just for a few of their friends. And if you just jump into their conversation, it's like eavesdropping on three guys having a beer together and just kind of jumping in with your viewpoint. Like, that's just not your place. Again, not to say that you don't have a right to advocate, but you have to figure out when's the right time to advocate.
Sure.
I think so. I don't know.
No, I get it. That's a hard line to follow.
Yeah. So tell me. So this is a very open-ended question, but I say, so tell me about like Indiana. Like I've never been there. What's kept you there?
It's mostly the borders. They're pretty hard to get. No, I'm joking. It's no. You know what? I'll say this. I've been to a lot of parts of the country. I think the only place I've never been is like the far west. Never been to California. But other than that, I've been to most parts of the country. And Midwest to me is king. I love it. I love the Midwest. I love that people say hi to you. I like that people wave at you. I like that if you're walking your dog or, you're out with your kids, people just stop talk. Then they move on. They hold the door. Not that matters. I don't care about that. But, they hold the door. They say, have a nice day. And I think they mean it for the most part. And, there's not that, I guess in the South, sometimes I hear people kind of go above and beyond on the have a nice day kind of thing. And I was like, I don't think you mean that, And so to our Midwesterners, they'll just tell you, and unlike New York, where they'll tell you exactly how their day's going, or parts of Connecticut, which I'll run into people. I'm like, have a nice day. They're like, it's not. I'm like, okay, sounds good. I was like, hey, I appreciate that too. That's my wife. My wife, she loves that about the East Coast, where like I like the Midwest, where it's just like, I'm not gonna tell you too much about myself, but I'll smile and say hi and hope everything's okay. And so, but as far as Indiana goes, it's treated me well. I don't, I'll be honest, I don't agree with 99% of the politics that happen in it, but there's a lot of really, really, really good people here that do the right thing. And, if you leave elections and everything off to the side, I've had a lot of luck in my life. And like I said, I have not had a whole lot to worry about, but I've been really lucky in my life that most of the people that I ever came in contact with were very loving and nice to me. And
Mhm.
so that could happen anywhere. It just happened to me. I was in the middle of West Central Indiana, and that's where it was. But man, Indiana's all right. Like it's okay. The people who do the right thing really do the right thing, and I'd say it's a little more moderate than people think. A lot of people would think Indiana is just like hotbed of like, it's really not. Like it's pretty moderate for the most part. It is surprising to most people in Indiana when something comes out, let's say governmentally, that is more right sided than like, because it's like I said, like we're a pretty in the middle of the road kind of state, and so most of the citizenry is, and so it's kind of a weird place. You got pockets like Indianapolis, which is tons of fun. Indy 500 is awesome. I think that's maybe why we're remembered. That's fine. It's a cool place to be. It's a good place to have a good time.
Have you gone to the Indy 500?
No, I've been to trainings. I've been to like all the trainings. I know people make fun of me all the time. It's like it's the only thing to do in your state. You don't even go. I was like, I never got into it. But the cool part is, all right, here's a little story about the Indy 500. And maybe I don't know if you've ever watched it or anything else like that. And, watching racing on TV is just like they're just going in a circle. But going to it, people love it. I've had people in my family that have gone every single year and whatever. But the cool part about like where I grew up is, I guess this is a nice little piece of Indiana, is they black out the race. Like you can't watch the race. So everyone else in the country is like, did you see that? And we're like, no, we didn't see it. Like you have to go to the race, and they black it out on TVs and they play like, Old Yeller or something like that. and so it was always on the radio. So I guess my lasting memory of Indiana will be, probably, when I'm dead. It's kind of like, man, Memorial Day weekend out at someone's house having a cookout, and the race is on the radio. You're not watching it. You're not doing anything else like that. You're just out in the yard. The weird part was everyone in Indiana, even if they don't like sports, they're like, they could give you 5 names that could probably win it that year. Even me, and I don't even watch, but when it comes to race day, I was like, put $5 on, this person. And I was like, they're like, you watched it? I go, no, no, not at all. But I know enough about the Indy 500. So Indiana's been good. Met my wife here. We contemplated actually moving to Wisconsin. Ultimately stayed. Another Midwest, right? So I'm a Midwest guy, and ultimately stayed and chose a place in Indiana. We're in West Lafayette now. That we thought it'd be a nice place to raise our kids, and whether they come back to Indiana or not, we wanted to give them a city that they might be interested in coming back to. And so, so Indiana is pretty cool. I come out sometime. It's we're pretty easygoing people, I promise. You get the fun part is there's so many different pockets and so many different groups it's in. It's such a huge piece of land, right? And when people are like, "Oh, it's just all corn and soybeans," I'm like, "It's 80% corn and soybeans," and then you get some cities here and there. But and a lot of stereotypes about us with basketball. It's true, and the corn and soybean thing, like I said, also true. But we also got some cool stuff going on, and it's really growing rapidly in these like suburban and urban areas. Like they're kind of like there's been a regrowth in like kind of the cities. We're seeing the rural population start to dissipate, and so we're actually seeing in like a lot of rural school districts them kind of like dropping enrollment because people are moving to larger areas, which stinks for them, but it's also kind of cool for Indiana. It could be a cool next 25 years.
Yeah. Wow. Was there like in I guess what I've seen, like I mean, I guess the narrative during the pandemic was that people are leaving New York, and you know, and it's irrecoverable. New York is still feels as crowded as ever. I was on the subway yesterday with my wife, and it's like 7 o'clock, and you're elbow to elbow with people.
Yeah.
So yeah,
They're still there.
so
Yeah.
there's still plenty of people here.
Yeah.
But when I've talked to other people, there is a feeling, like I talked to a friend in Colorado, I talked to women in Idaho, and they said that there's more people that have been moving out there from California or from such and such. Do you see more people leaving the cities to come to to where you are as well, or has it been more just a less rural?
I would say so. I see a heck of a lot more migration than I see like migration inside of Indiana versus like immigration from outside of Indiana into Indiana.
Okay.
So what I see is, and I'll be honest, like some of the decisions that, Indiana, the state, has made in the past year and a half, not a lot of people are flooding in right now. And so, but you do see some people who are leaving like those rural areas, like myself, like my wife, in pretty rural areas and moving to suburbs, moving to a city, moving because there's things to do.
Yeah.
And I think the pandemic, in a weird way, some people really enjoyed because it allowed them to kind of stay at home and do that. And I liked it too. But then I also realized that, man, there's not much to do in some of these rural areas. And so I think a lot of people are with kids, especially, are kind of like, some of these smaller towns or, losing some business, losing, restaurants, losing places to work. And so they're moving closer and allowing their kids to have a little bit better opportunity as far as like even parks and things. So instead of people moving to Indiana, I don't have those numbers, but I can tell you I have enough that it's like it's a migration inside of Indiana. If that makes a little bit more
interesting. No, that sounds like when we first, my wife and I had been living in Manhattan. We moved to Brooklyn in 2000, and we were ahead of the curve for a lot of people as far as like being included into how cool Brooklyn was. Not cool, but because we're not that kind of cool.
No.
How attractive it was to live in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
But like once you become in the know, then you stay within that area, and you like people who know.
Yeah,
so it's like right now the people know are in Indiana finding the better places.
Exactly. You're exactly right. They're figuring it out.
Yeah. But but what I've seen also, and I think like one of the things that I'll find I guess I'd say frustrating, but more kind of like when you talk to people about raising kids in the city, is there's usually kind of like a feeling of just like, oh, like it must be so hard, right? Like and to me there's an upside and a downside. I grew up in the suburbs of New York. I know what it's like to live in the suburbs, but I can say like there are things we give up, but there are things like, my boys can, walk 2 minutes to the schoolyard and find like 15 other kids playing basketball or running around or playing tag or whatever. So as a parent, like I don't have to drive them around anywhere. Rarely do I have to drive them around. They can take the subway, which seems unfathomable. That, oh my God, kids taking subways. But you grow up with it. So when you with your kids, I mean, from when the ages they were 3, 4, and 5, you're like teaching them like, this is how you remember what stop you're supposed to get off at, and this is what you do when you miss. Like it's all just a part of your life. So that when they start going to school, they have to take the subway because you can't take your kids there yourself. So they take it, and now I've got a daughter who's a junior in high school, and the entire city is her playground in a way that wasn't for me until I was in my like late 20s. And I've got a 7-year-old girl who already knows the city like the back of her hand.
Yeah.
So it's but I think that the other thing, I think that's one of the reasons why I've been doing the podcast, is just getting people to think about, what works for you. You should find what works for you. That's the key thing, is that should work for you.
And that's
and it doesn't mean it has to work for everybody else.
Yeah. And I think that's the hard part, is that, now, and I have never lived in a large city. I think like West Lafayette has like, 50-something thousand people in it. Lafayette itself, Tippecanoe County, which is kind of where we're at, has about 250,000 people in it, which for Indiana is pretty big. Not big when I'm talking to you, because you've got that on a couple of square blocks.
That's our neighborhood.
Right. I was going to say, it is, weirdly enough, this city is the most densely populated place in Indiana. So like it's
More than Indianapolis.
more than Indianapolis as far as population density. Yeah,
What
it's
is? Do you
wild.
know the density?
No, I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not going to tell you because I'm going to be
Yeah.
embarrassed. But you, but you also have to remember. I don't know if they counted these numbers or not because, like, as far as housing wise, I do believe it. But we also have Purdue University like 5 minutes away. I mean, it's like
Okay.
it's a land grant college. It's like 40,000 people. So,
Mhm.
so with when all the students are there, yeah, I mean, it's hovering 100. You know what I mean? 1,000 people live there. But anyway, but I think that's one of the problems that like I always had is that people are like, oh, you live out in the sticks, like that's really hard. I was like, man, it was actually pretty nice. Like I grew up kind of like that. You know, you had all this land, you had all this stuff. You just go outside, you know, you pee in the yard. You know, no one's gonna see you, and you just kind of had like instead of like this city being your playground, it was like you legit just had nature.
Playground.
And so it was like I just could go anywhere and you master some different skills and you know, you ride your bike 5 miles and no one questioned it. You know, and it was just
Yeah.
like you disappear and I knew I'd come back home, you know, and or you go out and ride, you know, four wheelers out, you know, 20 miles into the woods and then come back or whatever it may be. And then but on the flip side of that, you know, that is really great for some people. But for my wife and I, it was like, it's kind of boring. And I just I wanted things to do. I wanted to have people around and I wanted my kids to have opportunities that it's nice to play in the yard, but what if you played in a place where other kids were? You know, and it's like, would that be more beneficial to them than being kind of in these rural areas and playing, you know, with themselves? And that's fine as well. But yeah, I'm kind of with you there. To where the flip side is, you know, the things I gave up as far as like yard, like I still have a good sized yard. Like I'm looking out my back windows here, but you know, so what you give up in that privacy, you kind of make up for in, you know, your kids meeting other people and being surrounded just by new experiences and learning how to navigate, you know,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
a whole new way. So yeah, I think to each their own. I have no
Yeah.
problem. If people want to live that way, my parents still do. They freaking love it. And
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
keep telling them like, you know, moving around more people. My dad's like, why? I was like, never mind. Yeah, that's a silly question. Yeah, sorry, you couldn't just shoot guns in the air if you lived where I lived, you know, or whatever it is. Anyway, so yeah,
Yeah.
it's good.
No, no, yeah, and I think that there's also like there's an element of just kind of like in New York, I think there's a balance, and like we have a family of five in 1100 square foot apartment in a
Mm,
building with like 70 units, right,
yeah,
next to lots of other buildings with that. We don't have our own yard, but what we get, I think to me, there's two things. One, I think as me, I'm an introvert, so having all these people around me actually kind of forces me to be less
sure,
of an introvert.
sure.
And the other thing is like, if maybe we all have ADD, like maybe we all need stimulation of new things all the time. But it is very cool to be able to have a new restaurant to go to or a new neighborhood to explore. But not everybody
Yeah,
wants that. And I think I think the point of a society, and I think what the internet has forced us to do is we all have been living in our bubbles thinking this is the right way. We're seeing other things. And I think it's that kind of element of judginess that we need to suspend to be like, okay, this works for me. Just because this doesn't work for you, just because there are people who don't want to live in New York City, who don't want to go to museums, who don't want to explore 20 different cuisines and are very happy with Ruby Tuesdays or whatever, that's fine. That works for
yeah,
them. They like that and you like yours. And if they're happy and you're happy, that's all that really matters.
that's all that matters. And I think again, let's go back to that root cause. Are they doing it, and are they living a life that is for the betterment of those around them? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And those are always the people we like, right? And so
Yeah.
it's like I can think of people right now off the top of my head that I grew up around who they went grocery shopping. They drove 25 minutes into town to go grocery shopping every Wednesday. They ate at the same restaurant every Thursday. They did the same exact thing. They went to church on Sunday. And other than that, they stayed at home. They split firewood. They did all these things. And they couldn't have been happier, you know,
Yeah.
if they tried. And so I think there's a lot of respect there. And then they also just treated people kindly. And it
Right.
was like, didn't matter. I don't care what you do.
Right.
Couldn't care less on how you operate. If you're someone like me who's like, I got to eat at a new restaurant every 5 days, or, you know,
Mhm.
I'm going to go out and I'm an extrovert to the max to where like I need to like soak up like eyes, you know? And it's like,
Yeah.
I just need to go someplace where people are. And then it like rejuvenates me or whatever that is. And however people want to do that. But, you know, I've got a lot of respect for whatever keeps people alive. So I think that is the hard part is being able to see a life that's so vastly different than yours, and knowing that they love it just as much as what you love, right? Like when people are like, oh, it's just so busy and so crowded. And I'm like, some people like that. Like some people like to either the extroverts, they feel like, oh, I've got all these people I can just mingle with. And other people feel like it's also insulating, right? Like,
Yeah.
introverts, there's just like, no one talks to me if I don't want to be talked to. Like
Yeah.
I'm in with other thousands of people that, I just kind of blend right in. And so, but then on the flip side, where you live, you look out at, if you looked at like where my parents lived and you're like, where is like everyone, and that also had just a different way of life. And that's also nice. Yeah.
I had a guest, a friend of mine who moved back home to Wyoming, and one of the things he said was that there's something there's something in common between Wyoming and New York, and he's like, in Wyoming you can do whatever you want and nobody will ever know because there's nobody around. In New York you can do whatever you want because nobody cares.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
There's the sweetness right there, right? It's like. Yeah, I can think about all the fun I had as a kid, and it looks a heck of a lot different than the kids in New York. But mine was done in secret, and theirs are done in front of people who just don't give a crap. It's like I gotta go someplace else. These kids can do whatever they want to. They're not mine. Not my monkey. Not my monkeys. Not my circus. Right? Like it's like I'm not gonna worry about them. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had asked Dustin this question, and I don't know if it was a stumper or I forget what his answer was, but I'll ask you: is there a quintessential like dish for Indiana or quintessential food for Indiana?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think like the old school one is, and it's probably right. It's like a fried pork tenderloin. So like they take, like a piece of pork. Now you can get it two ways. There's one way where it's like a little bit thicker and it's like, I don't know, probably about like this big.
Jeez.
And, but then the other one, the more famous one is you take it and you like pulverize it like with a meat hammer until it's like, I'm not joking, it's this bigger than the plate, right? And then they put like this little tiny bun on it. It's always my favorite part. It's like a little cap, and it's this huge like pork tenderloin. And then so that's really famous in Indiana. I would also say like sugar cream pie is another one. Which
sugar
is like,
cream pie. What is that? That sounds
it's just
decadent,
buddy. It's just. Sugar. It is not. Do not think it's like some kind of confectionery, like some genius here, but it's not. I mean, kind of, if you make it well, it is. But it's like literally, sugar, eggs, cream. Oh man, cornstarch, and then a pie crust, and you like bake it. It comes from like all the when the people came out to Indiana in, the early 1800s, they didn't have anything. And so what was available to you, right? And so they started making pies out of that stuff. It's kind of like how biscuits and gravy came about, right? It's where you just had like a bunch of people. It's like, I don't have any money. I'm just going to mix these things together and kind of make it work. So sugar cream pie and pork tenderloins is kind of our go-to in Indiana. And they are dang good. I do like it. Can't help it.
All right, I'll add that. I'm gonna have to email you for suggested recipes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And then if I were to come out to Indiana for a day, what would you recommend? Like, what would you recommend an outsider do to get the flavor of Indiana?
Indianapolis is pretty cool. Like, I'll give Indianapolis some. They're two to the horn there. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway is really fun. Like it's a cool spot, and it is one of those places where if you are there ever in May, I mean, it is just astronomically big, and it holds like 300,000 people in the stands, right? And that doesn't even count the people that are like inside, the park. And so just kind of seeing it is pretty cool. But Indianapolis has, wonderful museums. They have the best children's museum in the country, in my opinion. I'd tell you to go to the airport, but it's the best airport. We've been rated the best airport the last, I think, 7 years in the United States. So no big deal. And but than that, I would say there's surrounding communities. Like there's like a Mass Ave, like it's on Massachusetts Avenue, which is a cool little spot. Kind of feel like you're not in Indianapolis or in Indiana, really. Like Butler University is really nice. There's an observatory there. and it's in a nice area as well. Um, but let me think. I don't know. Brown County State Park is beautiful. They call
Mm-hmm.
it the Little Rockies, or sorry,
Mm-hmm.
the Little Smokies,
Mm-hmm.
because of the hills. We don't have any mountains, but it's pretty good. Bloomington's a great town.
Mm-hmm.
Um, golly, I'm trying to think. Of course, come out to the West Central Indiana, but I also do. My part of my family is from like the top northwest corner of Indiana, and they call it the region because they kind of align themselves more with Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
But that Gary, Chicago area, that old industrial town, like it's cool stuff there. Like
Yeah.
it's just a cool little spot. Yeah, it's all kind of spread out. That's
Yeah.
the hard part. Yeah.
Is there a big difference between northern Indiana and southern Indiana, like culturally?
Culturally, no. I would say if you have Indiana, let's use my hand. Okay, like that very
Mm-hmm.
top, I guess in the camera it's gonna be this way, but
Mm-hmm.
where Lake Michigan is,
Mm-hmm.
like right where it connects with like Illinois there, that
Mm-hmm.
is a different culture
Okay.
than even the rest of Indiana, right?
Right.
That's its own culture.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say West Central Indiana down to like Terre Haute is
Mm-hmm.
kind of its own. Indianapolis is its own. And the rest is it's pretty much the same
Really?
in some aspects, not all.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's a little bit of a culture difference. I would say south of like Bloomington,
Mm-hmm.
which is like 2/3 down the state, which is where the University of Indiana is. You do feel a little bit more like, okay, I'm looking at groups that are a little bit more Kentucky, Tennessee
Mm-hmm.
than they are like the rest of Indiana. Even where I
Mm-hmm.
grew up, which was rural, definitely not Kentucky, Tennessee feel. It was
Right.
very Midwestern still. So it
Mm-hmm.
was not counting Kentucky out of the Midwest, but I do consider them a little more Southern
Yeah.
than like the Midwest. But other
Yeah.
than that, not really.
That's in the like what's one of the discussion points that come up more than a few times, and even in talk about New York is what people will say, like when somebody hears
Oh yeah.
whatever Tennessee, or they think of just Nashville, or if they hear Illinois they think of, actually it was a friend who lived in Nashville was talking about Illinois, where he's like, when people hear Illinois they only think of Chicago, whereas most of Illinois
Oh
is
yeah.
not Chicago, and
Not at
it's
all.
not like, it's much more rural. And
Yeah, it's super rural. I would say there are parts of Southern Illinois that are more rural than anything I've ever seen in Indiana, and it is crazy that they're kind of in the same state. There are some jokes in Indiana that they can tell where you're from, in Indiana by kind of the way you speak, because obviously at Northwest Corner they like my mom, like everybody at Car. It's like very Chicago, like right out of the Blues Brothers, right? And kind of that sound. And then you get a little further down south underneath Bloomington, and you're like, dang, man, they sound like they're from Lexington. So,
uh-huh.
yeah, so there's a little bit of a difference there, but yeah.
And do you so if you live near the other big division in Indiana would be like what university you pull for? Is that right?
Yeah. So I would say, yeah, the biggest one is IU and Purdue. And
Mm-hmm.
those are humongous universities, though. So it's like, Purdue has 45,000. I think IU has 42,000. They're just monstrous. And so that's usually what does it. Notre Dame's up there too,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of people find Notre Dame to be a little too snooty, and so they are, no, I'm joking. And no, and so you kind of get that division, but basketball is that's a wild time in Indiana,
Really?
especially with college basketball, because yeah, IU and Purdue have a great rivalry there. And then there's Butler as well. Went to a couple NCAA championships in the last couple of years, and so yeah, that I would say the biggest division as far as like any kind of schooling, yeah, would definitely be IU Purdue.
Okay, yeah, yeah. My both my boys are 11 and 13. They love their basketball right now, so
Oh,
which is good because I can give them, when my older son was playing soccer, I had nothing to contribute because I never
yeah,
played soccer.
yeah.
Basketball, I don't think I know enough to like offer some kind of coaching. And at least like my son Everett he's 13 and he's actually been I've gone with him a few times in the morning at like 6 a.m. to go
Oh, yeah.
rebound for him.
Good.
So like I can help with that.
Hey,
So,
I'll say this, but New York, like, still like very good. Like so many prospects come out of New York, basketball. But I'll always say Indiana, you'll have the best pickup basketball of all time because it doesn't matter where you're from, but I bet they can shoot a basketball. It's not much
Really.
else to do in a lot of places, so just got to shoot hoops.
Well, to me, that was one. I think basketball, like baseball, had its time, but I think that basketball might reflect the American mentality better than almost any other sport because it's a combination of individualism
Mm-hmm.
and of being part of a team, and that's what I like. Is like, if you want to work on basketball, there are skills that you can work on your own, but
Yeah.
you still have to learn how to integrate those within a team. I think like football is a great sport, but it's a lot more kind of like top down management. You know what I mean? Like and like with
You also got to
baseball,
have like 20 something people.
yeah,
Basketball,
yeah,
it's cheap too. I need a ball
yeah,
and I need to
exactly.
find someplace with a hoop. We can
Yeah.
do this,
And you can do it you do it by
Yeah.
yourself. You can do it with one person. So I think there's that flexibility that makes it so great. But I think also that idea of like, anybody can just go get a ball and find a hoop because they're out there, and you can get pretty good if you just put a lot of work into it. And like with the internet, like you don't need to get a trainer. Like you can just go find some good videos. There's so
Yeah.
much out there.
You can be from Sombor, Serbia, like
Yeah.
Nikola,
Oh my God. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
Jokic, right?
Yeah.
Just learn how to shoot a basketball, and what do you know? You can be out
Yeah.
in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. So, well, cool. Well, we've just passed the hour mark, and I appreciate having this chance to talk with you. And I know that could go a lot longer for sure. But I should let you get going. But can I ask to wrap up, like, what gives you hope at the end of the day?
Yeah. You know, I had a teacher when he retired. His name was Glenn White. He was my favorite teacher, and I remember when he retired, he said, "A lot of people say kids are different nowadays." And this was like 15 years ago, right? And so he goes, "Kids are different nowadays. Kids are harder. Kids are this or that. Kids are that." And he just said, "Kids are the exact same. Circumstances may be different, but kids are the exact same." And so I believe that with all my heart. And I also think truly that the generations that are coming after us are so much more empathetic and like kind. And, I think that we're raising a really good generation. And some people, have a problem with people being, too nice or whatever that may be. But I think that's great for a citizenry. But I have the most hope for the younger generations to do awesome things. Like I really think that we're creating a youth that is they're going through it right now. It's a tough time to grow up, but they're a strong group. And I have a lot of belief in like in the people in college right now and below, and even my own kids. I think we're seeing just a real revival of truth and just kids who believe in justice and and speak their minds. And I think that's an awesome thing. So my
Yeah.
hope is these young guys and girls are awesome. Like I love them. I think they're fantastic.
Oh, well, that's great to hear, and thank you for dedicating your life to taking care of that next generation.
Yeah. I'm not saying I'm helping, but I
We're not
I'm
screwing it up
there.
too
No, I'm
much.
just joking. I just don't screw them up. That's my plan. Just I won't screw you up. So,
Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much, Mike. I really appreciate the chance to talk with you.
well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you to all the listeners and viewers out there. May you go out and explore our country with curiosity, respect, compassion, and humility. All right. Take care, Mike. We'll be in touch. Thank you.